Welcome to this explainer. Today we're not just looking at history, we're literally putting it on the examination table. We're jumping back in time to when Mahatma Gandhi returned to India after his highly successful initiatives in South Africa. But what he found upon his return wasn't some functioning country ready for a simple political handover. No, he found a broken patient. So, this explainer is going to act as a kind of fascinating medical-style diagnosis of a fractured nation, followed by Gandhi's radical, structural cure. We're going to look at exactly how he broke down the systemic issues of his time, and the incredibly unique structural solution he proposed to fix it all.
You see, when Gandhi finally stepped back onto Indian soil, he didn't just see a struggling nation. He saw a state of absolute disarray. The rural Indian economy was completely broken down, and in his view, it had been deliberately debased beyond redemption by the British authorities. Just imagine looking at your homeland and realizing the fundamental engine of survival, the rural economy, has been completely stripped for parts. This immediate, painful reality is the starting point for Gandhi's entire diagnosis.
Alright, so here's our roadmap for breaking down this diagnosis today. First, a nation in disarray. Second, the education divide. Third, the alienated youth. Then we'll dive right into the cure with the village republic solution, and finally, true democracy realized. Let's jump in.
Okay, Section 1. A nation in disarray, the economic diagnoses.
So Gandhi's immediate action plan was twofold, and honestly, it was highly subversive for its time. He realized he had to instill in the Indian masses the moral courage to be economically self-sufficient. And how do you do that? By fulfilling primary needs in homegrown indigenous ways. But this wasn't just about day-to-day survival, right? It was effectively a massive economic boycott designed as a structural cure. He was fighting an empire not with guns, but with spinning wheels. He deduced that if India just produced its own goods, it would systematically break down the very economic motives that led the British to stay in India in the first place.
But well, here was the catch. Gandhi knew it was going to be a massive culture shock to make the Indian elite, who were completely accustomed to a centuries-old caste system, suddenly embrace the dignity of physical, sweaty labor. So what did he do? He turned his own life into a living example of these ideals. He asked every single resident of his Sabarmati ashram to do the exact same thing. He realized you just can't prescribe a cure unless you are willing to take the medicine yourself.
Moving on to Section 2. The education divide. Engineering social fissures. You see, the economy wasn't the only thing being engineered for control here. British administrators were funneling resources and Western education almost exclusively into the cities. And the villages? They were literally left to rot. Village institutions were closed down, and rural education became almost non-existent. This created a massive, cohesive, destroying gulf across the country. The educated city classes drifted away, developing absolutely no perception of the problems facing the villagers. Instead of advancing society, education was literally being used to rip it apart.
And it gets worse, because these fissures went straight to the dinner table. Men frequently received Western educations, which culturally aligned them with the ruling class, while their wives were deliberately left uneducated. Just imagine the sheer domestic tension there, an education system ripping families apart from the inside out. This deep intellectual disconnect severely aggravated the pressures in an already male-dominated society. It led to intense marital alienation without offering any sort of principled value system to replace what it was destroying.
That brings us to Section 3, the alienated youth and the cultural disconnect. Now, what's really fascinating here is Gandhi's deep concern about the psychological impact all of this had on the younger generation. Beyond the rural, urban, and gender divides, he used a very specific word to describe the youth: denationalized. He believed this foreign education system actively subdued their mental faculties. In their attempt to master a foreign language and culture, they basically lost their own imaginative abilities. As he put it, they were actively deluded into thinking that everything indigenous was bad, and all things British were absolutely superior. The tragic outcome of all this was a generation falling completely between two stools. They were educated for these rare administrative posts that barely even existed, so they found themselves jobless and utterly alienated from their own traditional mainstream. Unable to be absorbed back into the social structure, they completely failed to provide the enlightened leadership that India so desperately needed. Instead of becoming agents of positive change, they morphed into a dangerous class of deeply frustrated and alienated youth. All right, Section 4, the Village Republic Solution. After diagnosing all this rot, this is exactly where Gandhi prescribes his radical cure. So the absolutely crucial point here is Gandhian decentralization. Gandhi firmly believed that any concentration of power, whether we're talking political or economic, is a direct threat to real participatory democracy. So what's his cure? Take the power from the top and distribute it evenly across the bottom. He wanted to do this through parallel, village-level politics that institutionalized people's power directly against the centralizing, alienating forces of the modern state.
Okay, so in practice, this meant keeping political units incredibly small for direct, face-to-face decision-making. These village councils, known as panchayats, would map out and utilize their own local agricultural and industrial resources. But Gandhi didn't just want a nation of farmers. He envisioned villages overflowing with local talent, poets, artists, architects, linguists, and researchers. All of this local skill building was specifically designed to build up to one thing: complete unit-level economic autonomy.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, True Democracy Realized, the Ultimate Vision.
You know, these self-sufficient little republics weren't meant to just scrape by in rural poverty. Not at all. Gandhi envisioned them becoming so incredibly resilient that they would be capable of defending themselves, even if necessary, against the whole world. This is a vision of ultimate, unbreakable local strength, born from complete self-reliance.
For Gandhi, this Panchayati Raj system represented true democracy realized. The structural cure to India's rot wasn't just about swapping out British elites for Indian elites at the top of a centralized system. No, the real cure was stripping power from the center entirely and empowering the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy. Under this vision, the humblest, lowest citizen becomes completely equal to the tallest in the land.
So, Gandhi looked at the systemic rot of his time and concluded that centralization itself was the actual disease. And as we look at modern development models and governance today, I want to leave you with this question. Does true democracy actually require this kind of radical decentralization? Or can top-down governance ever truly serve the masses without alienating them? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structural breakdown gives you a totally new lens through which to view both historical and modern power.